slip in and then you'd bury yourself down there for days. And I would do an enormous amount of reading. And in fact, I certainly learned more in that semester, and I read far more. I didn't have to worry about school, so I could read and think. And basically, I would read books that started to address some of the concerns that I had. And some of the concerns that you had is what you understand and what you saw about you, what you began to evolve. And this is very personal, didn't go for everybody. But the relationship between the real world that you saw and what you felt to be true, and the inability of, say, the academics and the professors to deal with the real world. Why are things happening? Well, the president made a wrong decision. Presidents don't make wrong decisions. Basically, if you understand, and in this process, and I don't want to give you my views, I want to talk about how these things evolved. And you read about the Russian Revolution, you read about Cuba, then you read and you understand, and then you say, what's going on? How is this being reflected in the world that I'm living? For example, right now, if you want to understand what goes on in the United States, just use, and we can use 50 examples, you use Nicaragua. You will learn more. You don't have to go to Nicaragua. You don't have to read the good books in Nicaragua. If you want to understand what's going on in America today, you read the New York Times. And you read the New York Times and you understand why they are not talking about what's going on in Nicaragua. Okay? That's the important story. The important story is not Nicaragua. It's not the United States government attitude toward Nicaragua, which is no different than it's been in 50 years. The United States has the right to destroy any government in Latin America that they want, and that's been consistent for 50 or 100 years. There's nothing new about that. What is new is why, when you read the New York Times, the real truth is not being told and how that's obfuscated. Okay, that's what the interesting story. So if you want to read what goes on, and you want to know, and I was doing that. I remember reading and beginning to read about the Cuban Revolution, and what I was more impressed about is how it was being reported in the United States press. And I began to understand that you don't always hear all of the truth, that there are a lot of lies that are going on in society. Okay? And that was, to me, a tremendous opening, reading voluminously, as a matter of fact, at that time. The 60s, and one doesn't know. One can't look back on the 60s. The history hasn't been written. One doesn't know. It was in many ways a period of exhilaration, I think, and a period of a lot of pain. What began to happen is a lot of the barriers began to fall down, and people really began to ask hard questions. What is human life? I mean, what Rick was talking about is in the 50s and in the 70s, it's pretty easy. You go out, you go to school, the teacher tells you something, you write it down assiduously, you take the exam, okay, you go out, you get a job, you get married, you do all, it's pretty easy. It's not that hard. It's nice to have a structured existence. And that's pretty much what the 50s were about. And in many ways, that's nice and easy. If somebody tells you how to begin and how to end, it's pretty easy. But the 60s, in every area, and one led to another, was a busting off. And some of it very, very painful and very crazy. I remember one time, just as an example of that, a friend of mine, a guy I knew, actually, a neighbor when I was living in New York for a while, who was, between you and me, not the most sane human being in the world. The guy he was playing a flute or a harp. He was playing away, and it was terrible. I said, God, can't you play anything? He says, this is real music. It's real, I'm expressing myself. It's terrible stuff. But it was the feeling, what's the difference between a Beethoven concerto and what he was doing? It's music, it's expression. And, I think he was wrong, but there was a feeling that we didn't quite know. One was rejecting it. Old standards, old values were being smashed asunder, and people didn't quite know how to develop new standards. And of course, there's always that search for new standards, but it took place at a frenetic pace. You had, certainly in the student movement, what young people were saying, and it developed more strongly after I left college. But people were saying, it's crap, I don't want to learn what you're teaching me. Okay? This place is a dump. And many painful decisions that students had to make. Basically, I remember this, and in the beginning of the 60s, it was more conservative than the mid and end 60s. Sitting there and saying, why? What am I sitting here taking notes for? This is stupid. Do I really have to suffer through all of this to get the degree, or should I go out and do something that's meaningful now? And people were many people picked up and left school. Okay? People started what they called free universities all over the place. Many institutions, you had the university. You might have a place, with the University of Minnesota and the Free University of Minnesota down the street. And in fact, the more exciting, important courses were being taught at the Free University, where the faculty, sometimes faculty who had been thrown out of the regular universities, were teaching what they felt was a lot more honest material than was the conventional university. Battles. I mean, here at the university, There was a lot of friction between the Board of Trustees regarding South Africa and the students. In the 60s, that was going on in all areas. I remember myself, I have to modestly admit, writing an article for the student newspaper at the University of Chicago. And it was called